Hello and welcome back. We got another book review for you today. We're looking at The City of God by St. Augustine. It is his defense of Christianity in the wake of the collapse and fall of the Roman Empire and the sack of Rome. It's an absolutely fascinating book, well worth reading. But the first thing we need to say is it's huge. This version I have is 867 pages. Some translations run over 1,000 pages. So it's just a lot to read, and it's a big commitment to make your way through. I was in a book group that read it over the course of 6 to 7 months, and we still felt rushed. We were reading a book. There are 22 books in the book, The City of God, and we were reading about a book a week for that entire time, and that still felt rushed. So just know that this is big, this is a lot, but it's also a classic in the best sense. It feels very timely, even though it was written 1600 years ago. It touches on things that are as timely today as they were then. It makes it probably the hardest book of the early church fathers that I've read. Again, not because it's difficult, but because of the length. So just be aware of that as you're going in. Almost every single page is filled with some sort of brilliance. Just about anything that you could think of to talk about related to the Christian faith, Augustine addresses at some point, and addresses in a way that is going to make you sit up and listen. You're not going to agree with everything he says, but you're going to want to pay attention. And so it's really just an excellent book that covers a huge swath of topics and has a sweeping vision of life and history and of the world as being from God and for God and heading to God. It's a God-centered vision of reality, which in our world where we talk about all sorts of different things and address many of the topics Augustine addresses, his God-centered vision is a gift to the church. So that even if we're talking about the same things, we're often not talking about them in the same way because we struggle as modern and postmodern contemporary people to have as God-centered and God-focused of a vision as Augustine does. And so just reading him is a gift to be able to recover some of what it looks like to actually have God as the center of life and history. So the book opens with a defense of Christianity in the wake of the sack of Rome and the fall of and decline of the Roman Empire. So Augustine says that Christians are not to blame. That was a common charge that was going on at that time, that Christianity had made Rome weak or brought the wrath of the gods or any number of things, that they were the reason. And he looks at some of the details of the actual sack and fall of Rome and talks about how the virtue of the Christians in the midst of that, how their presence actually led to restraint from the invaders because they actually granted them sanctuary in the churches and they didn't sack the churches. So the actual benefit of having Christians in the city of Rome during the fall. And then the whole first half of the book, he's really going through Roman history and explaining why we shouldn't worship the pagan gods, but should worship the one true God. So if the charge is that Christianity is the reason that Rome suffered this calamity, he goes through the whole history of Rome prior to the birth of Christ, looking at all the calamities that Rome suffered when they were worshiping these pagan gods. Oh, you worshiped Jupiter, and you worshiped Hera, and you worshiped all these gods, and it didn't benefit you. You still suffered all these calamities. So the fact that, we abandoned the gods for the Christian God is not an argument that works. And he also goes through the various explanations of the worship of these gods and the practices of these gods and the inconsistency and the vices that are associated with worship and following these gods. And Augustine is really good to draw from pagan sources here, so he's not, in a strict sense, making a biblical argument against worshiping the pagan gods. He spends hundreds of pages drawing from their own sources and their own philosophers to point out how it makes no sense for them to worship those gods. It makes no sense because there's no benefit in this life to worshiping those gods, but there's also no benefit in the life to come. And the whole kind of summary of the first half of this book is that worshiping the one true God is the only source of happiness in this life and in the life to come. In the second half of the book, he starts to trace the history of the two cities where the city of God gets its name. So there's the city of God, which is the city, but also the culture, the people, the church, the republic, the people that are rooted in love of God and aimed toward love of God. Whereas the city of man, which is the only other city in kind of Augustine's scheme, is rooted in love of self. So either we're motivated by love of God or love of self, and there's two different cities with two very different ends, both in the sense of purpose, but also in the sense of destiny. And he traces the history of both these cities from biblical history, and then goes back and goes through kind of secular history, noting the city of God, noting the church, the people motivated by the love of God, and looking at the city of man and its trajectory, its practices, its way of life. And then ends with the final judgment and the new heavens and the new earth as the culmination of these two cities with their two different destinies. And right before he gets to that is probably the most famous chapter in the book, is book 19, where it deals a lot with political theology and what does it look like to navigate a world between, we're not yet at the return of Christ. Christ has come, but he has not come again. The already not yet. What does it look like to live as political creatures in a world where the city of man exists and the city of God? And how do you live side by side, or how does that work? And so it's really a fascinating chapter, and many people say that's worth reading the whole book, but I would suggest if you're going to do it, read the whole thing. I know it's a big ask, it's a big task, but it really comes together when you've actually read the whole thing, because if we read the politics by itself, it's easy to miss the God-centered focus of the whole vision, and we start focusing on, well, what's my country, and what's my church, and what's my political philosophy going to be about this world. And the whole point for Augustine is the end of all things in God and then the life to come. And if we don't have that as central to our vision, we're going to miss or misread all of what he's talking about with politics. So when it comes to politics or angels or demons or history, sex, suicide, what does it look like to do apologetics, to think about heaven or virtue, the good life? All these things Augustine talks about at length. He goes through the whole biblical story. So pretty much anything that you can think about. Talks about sacraments. He talks about the church. Again, anything you could think of, Augustine addresses at some point in this book. And he does so in a way that's going to make you sit up and pay attention. So you're not going to agree with everything that Augustine says. I know I didn't. But you understand why this book and his work was so influential for the last 1600 years. This is a classic in the best sense of the word. And it is a worthy source to go back to again and again as you're thinking through and trying to wrestle with the faith and what does it mean to live that out in this world. Augustine is going to be a great conversation partner. So pick up The City of God by Augustine. Read it, mark it up, argue with it, agree with it, but definitely read it. It's worth the time. It's worth your effort. And I enjoyed reading it with a group, reading it with others. That was really beneficial for me. So if you want to try to find a group of people willing to read this with you, City of God, pick it up. Excellent book to read. Thank you for your time today. If you like this video, please click the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you can get updated on further book reviews. If you have a book that you would like me to read and review, please let me know in the comments, and I'll try to take a time to read that and put it up on the channel. And if you like how I think about theology and books, know that I've written a couple books myself. I have Our Only Comfort, which is a set of daily devotions through the Heidelberg Catechism, and I have a new book, Rooted, Growing in Christ in a Rootless Age, that's coming out June 7th, wherever books are sold. So please consider buying either of those. They'll be linked in the description, and thank you for your time.